We usually start with a story that has nothing to do with anything other than maybe put a smile on our face. And so we'll tell you one, we'll share with you one. It's a story from my wife. Last Wednesday night, matter of fact, as we were going away from the church building, she said, I got one you can share with people. She said, it's not that funny. And I would agree with her, it's not that funny. But nevertheless, she said, you ought to share it with people. So since this is my wife's joke, my wife's story, y'all laugh to make her feel good when we get through with it. Suzanne taught kindergarten for years. How many years you teach kindergarten? 19 years she taught kindergarten. That's where she got her other stars. But she one day was in classroom and she was teaching the children, talking to them. And she was talking to them about, government and the president. And this was during the days of Bill Clinton as president of the United States. And so she asked them, she said, who is our president? And they all looked at her like most kindergartners do with blank stares, having no idea. We don't know. That in essence was their stare. And so finally she thought, well, I'll give them a hint. So she said, who's our president? And they still looked at her and she said, Bill. And one little boy said, Hall. Not everybody would get that, but folks around here probably for the most part would. So I told her when that happened that she ought to write that down and send it to Bill Hall, but she didn't do it. And I think all teachers ought to write a book. If they've got as many stories as Suzanne's got, they all ought to write books. I guess that's the reason they don't, because they don't want to relive it. But anyway, Mark 14, verse 66. Mark 14, verse 66. We are discussing, of course, going through the book of Mark, and yes, it takes a long time for me to get through, but sometimes virtually we cut things short or just didn't try to grasp a whole lot of material. Where we are now is pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of things. There's some lessons that we can learn from them, some good things. And the end of the 14th chapter of the book of Mark is where Peter denies the Lord. And Mark's account is interesting. It is different, of course, than Matthew and Luke and John's account. But nevertheless, it gives us some insight, and we're sticking pretty much, since we're studying out of Mark, with what Mark says. So let's look at it. It says, now, as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and when he saw Peter's warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you are saying. And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again and began to say to those who stood by, this is one of them. Then he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it. Then he began to curse and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. A second time the rooster crowed. Then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he wept. Peter, the man that we do look up to, and one of the reasons we look up to him is because even after his failure, he got up. I have a little saying on my desk that says, failure is not falling. Failure is when you don't get up after you've fallen. Peter got up, so Peter was not a failure. But Peter, as we looked at a couple of weeks ago, Peter was somewhat braggadocious. The Lord told him, said, you're going to deny me. And Peter said, no, not me. I'm not going to deny. I'll never deny you. I'll never say anything about you. And yet he did. What was it that caused Peter to say that in the first place? You just looked at me like you wanted to say something. Okay. Bad worded question, at least from what my mind is thinking then. What caused Peter to say, I'll never deny the Lord? Pride, right? Pride. Right. Yeah, I'll never deny you. I'll never say anything about you. And yet, when it comes time, and let's remember, this is only a space of a few hours. This is not a space of I said it a month ago or I said it a year ago. This is only a matter of a few hours. I was reminded, I was talking to some folks Monday, and I was reminded of a time in which I was talking to my secretary when I was at Pomona, and we were talking about topics and things for me to preach on and different things. And I said, well, I just preached on that a year ago. Well, you ought to preach on it again. And I said, well, I just preached on it a year ago. Of course, you can go at things different angles. And she says, Paul, why do you think that people remember what you say? Because I do. I remember what I said. And I remember that you say the things because that was a few years ago. Peter, in just a matter of a few hours, forgets or doesn't think. Or maybe we see really how he really did, if you let me use the expression, shoot his mouth off when he said, I'll never deny the Lord. Whatever the case may be, Peter now denies the Lord. This lady, evidently, John adds a little bit to this from the standpoint of it's in the courtyard of the high priest. And this servant girl, notice that says that when she saw Peter, it's almost as if, now granted, there's no text, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, that says this, but it's almost as if as soon as she saw him, this is what she said. Tradition, you can put as much or as little as you want into tradition, but tradition says that this was Malchus's daughter. Now remember who Malchus was? That's right. That's right. And tradition says this is his daughter. Now, like I say, you can put as much or as little as you want to into that. But she says, as soon as she sees him, she says, "Oh, you were with Jesus. You were one." And notice what she says. You were with Jesus of Nazareth. Now, Sunday we talked about some of the things with regards to the titles that were used in Matthew chapter 27, verses 39, 40, 41, 42, and 43. Son of God, Son of David. But here, she identifies Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth. The Jesus from a particular place. Not a lineage, not a Messiah, not Son of God, but Jesus from the city over here. You say, well, why is that so interesting? Well, it is to me because for the simple reason, she's just basically saying, Jesus that you follow, Peter, he's just a man. She's not claiming messiahship for him. She's not claiming a deity for him. She's not claiming kingship for him. She's just saying he's somebody else. But as she says that, Peter, verse 68 says, denied him. I don't know nor understand what you're saying. That's a easy way out, isn't it, right at first? What are you saying? It was almost as if she was speaking a foreign language. Have no clue what you mean. Don't understand. But he went out and the rooster crowed. So he denied the Lord. Mark's the only one of the accounts that, interestingly enough, talks about the rooster crowing and then another denial and the rooster crowing after the third denial. Notice the rooster crows, and the servant girl saw him again. A few minutes passed, possibly, and she said, "This is one of them." And so now, all of a sudden, if she didn't in the first, she now is getting the rest of the folks involved that are around. This is not a private place or a private gathering. This is a public place. And there, remember we said that the Jews were there at Jerusalem because of the feast that was going on. And so there's a lot of people everywhere. There's nowhere that you could go really if there weren't people. And so now she gets everybody else behind her. Oh, this is one of those. This is one of those that stood by. This is one of them. And verse 70 says, he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, surely you're one of them. Now think about it. Mark has the girl as the first two accusers. And then the third accuser is not the girl, but who? The crowd. What is it that gives him away, at least to them? His accent, his speech. Y'all ever gone up north? They talk funny up there. I don't mean that ugly. But, you go somewhere else. And, not only somewhere else do you go and you get a little different speaking, but you go somewhere else and you get a different vocabulary. I shared this back, I've shared it several times. Well, the second work that I was ever in, small community in West Tennessee, about 1,200 people in the community. And as I would talk to people, they used a particular word. Instead of I helped them or they helped them, they used the word hoped. We hoped them. And I've never found that anywhere else much. And there's nothing wrong with it, but when the first few people would use it, I would go, huh? And then they would tell me, well, here they're saying, Peter, your speech, you talk like a Galilean. Your speech is what's giving you away. And so Peter begins then in verse 71, it says that he began to curse and to swear. I'm not sure why it has always been thought that if we curse and swear, that adds emphasis to what we're saying. Sometimes. Well, their Sunday sermon's going to be changed now. Yeah. For me, I've taken the road that it's a lack of vocabulary. Be able to express your point and to express it in such a way that folks understand. Now, folks can interpret things all kinds of ways. I had a guy once that said, you raised your voice at me. I said, no, I didn't. And he said, yes, you did. And I didn't get into it with him. I just said, okay, you think so, I'm sorry. But I wanted to tell him that whole church out there would have been able to hear me if I had raised my voice. Go ask my wife if that's not true. Folks hear what they want to hear. And folks think emphasis are placed at different places. This emphasis, okay, I'll curse and I'll swear and I'll say, I don't know him. I have no clue who he is. I don't know this man. And so the rooster crows, verse 72, and Peter called to remembrance the word that Jesus had spoken. So he remembered. Which tells us also, teaches us another lesson. That sometimes our hearts and our heads have to be jogged, don't they? Sometimes we have to be jogged into remembering. We don't always remember everything. I think my secretary is right. Why do you think we remember everything you said? We don't always remember what is said to us. And then, you're someone that you talk to on a regular basis will say, do you remember when I told you? And when they jog your memory, you say yes. But if they hadn't jogged your memory, you might never have remembered that. Peter's memory was jogged. And when it was jogged, he remembered. And what? What did he do? We don't really have it in Mark's account, but what did he do? He wept. He wept. Peter was sorry for what he had done. So Peter did what he did. He was sorry for what he had done. And later, of course, Peter will be back in the Lord's good graces. Peter will preach the first gospel sermon in Acts chapter 2. But I want us to think about a couple of things. Jesus, from a standpoint of distance, is probably at least within eyesight of Peter. And when the cock crows, Jesus looks at him. How do you think Peter might have felt? Yeah, real little, right, Ken? Yeah. Remember? No, I'm so old, I don't remember. Yeah, I do remember that. There you go. There you go. So Peter probably, felt really bad because he evidently did, because he went out and wept. Wonder how Jesus felt. Wonder how Jesus felt. I wonder if in his own mind he said, yeah, I knew he was going to do it. I knew it would happen. But don't you also think, and there's no way of knowing, but don't you think Jesus probably felt some great sorrow and great compassion for Peter? Yeah, I knew he was going to do it. Wished he hadn't. Poor Peter. And then if you stop and think about another aspect, if Jesus felt that way, and Peter felt that way, guess who couldn't go and comfort Peter? The one that would have been able to comfort him the best. Jesus couldn't get to him to comfort him. And so therein lies another level, if you will, of sadness to this story. That the one that could have comforted him the best, that's not to say the other apostles didn't, but the one that could comfort him the best couldn't get to him. And so it is that it reminds us that our memories can be jogged, that when they're jogged and we realize we've done wrong, we need to do as Peter did. We need to go out and weep and repent and change. And we need to let the Lord comfort us. And he comforts us through his word, of course. Anything else? Well, how about Jesus is brought before Pilate? We'll just ease on into the 15th chapter. Immediately in the morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and delivered him to Pilate. Jesus was a political problem for folks. Remember, we said that he went before Caiaphas or went before Annas and Caiaphas, and then Annas and the Sanhedrin, and now he's going to go before Pilate and Herod and Pilate. He had three ecclesiastical trials. He's fixing to have 3 civil trials, very short order, admittedly. But Jesus presented a political problem. For Caiaphas and for Annas, he presented a political problem because they were Jewish. And what did the Jews want to do? They wanted him crucified, right? Why did they want Jesus crucified, remember? Because they thought he had what? Blasphemed, right? He'd spoken out. He'd called himself the Messiah. Now, before Pilate, and then Herod, and then Pilate again, he poses a political problem as well. And it's not so much from the standpoint of religion, because they're not concerned with religion, but they're concerned with the Roman law, and they've got problems. So they led him away to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered and said to him, "It is as you say." And the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. Then Pilate asked him again, saying, "Do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you." But Jesus still answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. Through this, you see the fulfillment, don't you, of prophecy. This prophecy, or this part of it, is the fulfillment of the prophecy that he would be what? Silent, right? Silent, Isaiah 53, that he would be silent before those that would accuse him. But notice what happens. Pilate first asks him, "Are you a king?" And he says, "It is as you say." In other words, he answers him, but he doesn't give much explanation. It's sort of like, I'll tell Suzanne every once in a while, "Well, I didn't get much out of them." "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, I asked them a question and they just answer it. And that's all the information they give." In other words, "How you doing today?" "Fine." "What's your name?" "John Smith." "Where are you from?" "Nashville." Give me some help here. Yeah. And so Jesus, when he's asked, he says, "It's as you say it." But then he doesn't answer anything else. Pilate keeps asking him. Notice that he says in verse 4, Pilate asked him again. And the idea is maybe not just once, but twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Do you answer nothing? How many things they testify against you? See how many things. But Jesus didn't answer him anything. And because of that, look what it says in verse 5. What did Pilate do? He marveled, right? Marveled. Why do you suppose Pilate marveled? Absolutely. Absolutely. They'd be singing like a canary, just, right? Just, get me out of here, anything. But Jesus is a man of fortitude, a man of character, a man of courage. But also Jesus knew what? This had to happen, right? He knew it had to happen. And so, in knowing it had to happen, he probably also knew what? There was nothing he could say. He couldn't say a word. That they wouldn't take it and they wouldn't misconstrue it. They wouldn't turn it on him. This is going to have to happen. It's God's will. Let's just let it happen. Verse 6. Anything about that? That kind of, you move to a little next thought. Pilate is going to deliver Jesus. It says, now at the feast, he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. And there was one named Barabbas who was chained with his fellow rebels. They committed murder in the rebellion. And the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do as they had always done for them. To do just as he had always done for them. I'm sorry, I can't read tonight. But Pilate answered them, saying, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? For he knew the chief priest had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd so that it should release Barabbas to them. Pilate answered and said to them again, what then do you want me to do with him who you call the King of the Jews. So they cried out again, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, why, what evil has he done? But they cried out all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and he delivered Jesus after he had scourged him to be crucified. There's a lot in there, but there's not a lot. It's sort of a narrative that fits. But let's look at a few things. Let's look at the fact that they had the Jews had a custom, and that was that on the feast that especially would be released a particular individual, and so Pilate is asking them, who do you want me to release to you? Notice that it talks about this man by the name of Barabbas. Barabbas, it calls him what? Verse 7. An insurrectionist, a murderer, some versions have. These are all differences. And rebels, the New King James Version says. Barabbas is believed to have been of the same group that the two thieves that were crucified, one on either side of Jesus, were a part of. The insurrectionist. By that, what we need to understand is a little history. That there was, about this time, there was an insurrection, a rising up of people, especially of Jewish background, against the Romans. And evidently, and the word can be translated murderers, they may have murdered in the insurrectionists. Tradition, once again, you can only carry that so far, but tradition says that Barabbas may have been the leader of the group. While Rome always had its folks that didn't want Rome to be in charge, because, nobody likes government anyway. So there was this group, and you have at least 3 folks that are in jail. You have probably more, but you have 3 folks, Barabbas and the 2 thieves, that are in jail. And so Pilate wants to know, who do you want me to release? Well, give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. But notice something. Notice why they did that. Look at verse 11. The chief priest stirred up the people. What he said, who knows? No one knows. But what he said was such that if folks in their right mind had been looking, okay, we want a man that's innocent. Matter of fact, if you go back, and in Matthew, not so much in Mark's account, but if you go back in Matthew, Luke, and John's account, there are 5 times, when you try to put it all together chronologically, there are 5 times in which Pilate basically says Jesus is an innocent man. And so Pilate understood that really, from a standpoint of their law, Jesus should be set free. Now, Pilate may not understand the spiritual aspect, but Pilate understands the physical aspect, that Jesus should be let free. And so he's giving folks this opportunity. But the chief priest, who does not like Jesus because he's claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God, works the people up. And so they're shouting, we want Barabbas. So what do you want me to do with Jesus? But notice what Pilate says. What do you want me to do with him who's called King of the Jews? Now in John 18, the folks say, well, we have a law, and that law is to kill him, crucify him. And so they shout out, according to Mark's account, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, why, what evil has he done? But that just seemed to, at least in Mark's way of thinking, that just seemed to invoke more anger within them, because notice what it says, they cried out all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and he delivered Jesus after he had scourged him to be crucified. So tell me, what do you think about Pilate? Yeah.
And seemingly to be crucified wasn't that bad enough.
Yeah. 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 I agree. Pilate is a typical weak-kneed politician. He's so worried about what the crowd's going to say that he doesn't do what he feels is right within his own heart. And that's to let Jesus go. Yeah, in John's account. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Tell the story. Did I catch you up? Yeah. Yeah.
What she's trying to say, Paul, is you need to listen to the Bible.
What? Well, no. Well, what I realized when I asked the question, tell the story further, that she just remembered the bit of it, and she probably hadn't read it. One
thing I talk about the fact that you talk Jesus said because their thing was that Howard understood that in Bobby Brothers. It wasn't. Blasphemy was the charge. They brought it because they were getting too much influence and power in the Jewish nation.
Right.
And they were losing. They already lost political control.
Yes.
Now they were losing religious control.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Mark says that Pilate knew it was because of envy. And that's all it was. It was a loss of power that the Sanhedrin was losing because they had, how do I say this without getting too far involved in even modern day church history? But after a period of time, let's go at it this way. Years and years ago, I had an elder of the congregation where I was working at the time that said every ministry within the congregation every 2 years ought to be at least looked at. And then it ought to be either tweaked, or if it's not doing the job, done away with, it's something else put in its place. He was a businessman. He sold campers, owned camping business, campers business. His family still runs it. He's passed away now. But his theory is to bring the deacons in that were over the different ministries. Now, we didn't do this, sadly, but this was his theory, to bring them in at least every 2 years, talk to them about what they were doing. What do you like? What do you don't like? Is it effective? Is it not effective? What can we change? What do we need to change? And then the elders would make the decision. So in other words, it's the idea of infusing new blood into. Now let's take that and let's go into religion. If you don't infuse new blood somehow, some way into it, it becomes old and stale. Now, we cannot change what God says. We cannot. I don't care if you consider a tradition or not. If God says to do it this way, then that is what we are supposed to do. I.e., take the Lord's Supper on the first day of every week. We're supposed to do that. Sing. We're supposed to do that. Congregationally, we're supposed to do that. We can't change those things. There are things we can change that we don't have to change, but sometimes it's all right to change. Let me give you a for instance of something that I told Suzanne that I've noticed. I look at, especially because of the pandemic, more and more churches have put more and more videos of their lessons, their sermons up on the internet. And I'll watch, within a week's time, I'll watch 3 or 4 guys' sermons. And these are videos now of just a Sunday morning sermon, not from a standpoint of, well, this was done in private. This is their actual service. Guys are dressed I'm not that nice tonight, but not this nice. Blue jeans and a shirt. And this is Sunday morning preaching. Now, I'm fixing to step in it. You know I wear a suit on Sundays. And I probably always will. I like them. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with those guys dressing that way. If they want to, and the elders say it's all right, and the congregation says it's all right. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it. Some say, well, it will attract the outsider, the individual that doesn't know anything about the church. I don't think it will myself. I don't think it'll run them off, but I don't think it'll attract them either. Paul Daugherty opinion. That's all that is. That's all that is. That's not scripture. That's not Bible. And if next week our elders say, Paul, we want you to come in khakis and a shirt, I'll be here in khakis and a shirt because there's no scripture. But things have changed. So you see there's a difference, and some things can change and some things can't. Now go back to first century. Go back to the text. Go back to what Jim was talking about. The Jews had lost out. They'd lost their young people. They were losing because Jesus was gaining. Jesus wasn't the first movement, was he? Away from Judaism. We had another one when we began this book of Mark. Who was it? John the Baptist. Now there were others, but there were movements, and folks were beginning to get away from Judaism, and they were losing their power, and they saw it. And because of envy, as Mark says with regards to Pilate, because of envy, Pilate knew why they had given him over. And it was all because they were envious of what he was gaining and they were losing. Now that I've stepped in a lot of things. Anything else? Well, that's a great place to end. The soldiers will mock him, we'll crucify him, we'll move. I'll try to move a little faster. I know you're anxious for me to move faster, so I'll try not to be so long-winded. Anything else we need to talk about? Hopefully we're giving you things to think about. That's really, I'm not of the Jerry Barber school, and I know y'all heard this a lot. Just get a mustard seed. I'm not of that bent, but I'm of giving you something to think about, and so hopefully we've done that. And if you ever have questions, comments, feel free to talk to me, and we'll explore whatever's next. All right. Ken's going to lead some word of prayer.